I know I could be accused of Islamophobism, whatever, that I am Islamophobic. But I have several objections to Islam, but I'm not an authority on the Quran and all of the Islam world. I do think, though, just a casual observation of the mainline Islamic nations gives you a pretty strong picture of the fact that the role of a woman in that culture is not very dignified. Now, I think it's entirely possible that behind the closed doors of their home, a woman can be very domineering. But I also know that behind the closed doors of an Islamic home, women are beaten and humiliated and treated as slaves. This bothers me. Duh. And here's another thing that bothers me. Feminists in the United States are surprisingly silent about this kind of horrible behavior, this kind of discrimination against women in the Islamic nations. And now, as I know, okay, you can think whatever you want to think of me, but I think mathematically, if you look at what has happened in the last 20 years, you cannot deny that Islam is moving west. And still, there's no word from the feminists about how brutal and unfair and wrong the Islamic practice of dealing badly, harshly, as though women didn't have rights. Because, oh, by the way, they have such a small amount of rights under strict Islam. It's as though they didn't have rights. So this is not this post is not all about how bad Islam is and how hypocritical I think the mainline feminists in America are. It's all about my body, my rights. We either the glass ceiling, which I can't deny. We have one. I don't know that. I do know there are significant exceptions to that concept. But whatever. What I'm saying is, or where I want to go, is that the gospel it upsets the fruit basket for valuing people. When Jesus came, just looking at his biographies, you realize that he had a unique perspective about women. He interacted with women very differently than the other Jews, virtually all other Jews. You see him in conversation with women publicly. I could go through and just show time after time after time after time, how Jesus kind of broke, well, not kind of, he broke with the tradition of how women were treated under Judaism. I could make a very strong case that Jesus created a way of living that opened up the world for women. In the first century, in Rome, in a Grecian culture, in a Jewish culture, there was very, very little room for a woman to have an impact outside the confines of her home. The man was given every right, not the woman. It was the man who could choose whatever direction he wanted to go, and the woman, his wife, had virtually no say in it, certainly not in public. In the synagogue for the Jew, on the days of worship and on high holy days, it was men who were the main participants, and women were present, but here's what their function was. Their function was to provide the food, the trappings for the feasting that was supposed to happen. At the Sabbath meal, it was the papa who took the lead, not the mama. When Passover came, it was the papa. And for most households, because you had at least 2 generations in the same household, it was the grandpapa who led the family through the Passover Seder. And so where were the women during all this? They were making sure that all the proper things were on the table or within reach. They were, at best, they were secondary participants, but they had no leadership. Why am I telling you all this? Because when we look at how Paul instructs Timothy concerning women in the church, if you don't look at the culture that Paul lived in and into which he was speaking, you can't interpret this thing very well. If you look for principles, no problem. But if you get beyond just the principle, you get into what was he, a woman hater? What did he? This doesn't sound right. Was what we've learned is called a misogynist? Was he a male dominator and promoter of male domination? Look at what we're in 1 Timothy chapter 2. We'll pick it up at verse 8. Therefore, I want the men everywhere to pray, lifting up holy hands without anger or disputing. I also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds, appropriate for women who profess to worship God. Now that's the easy part, and we're going to come back to that and look at it. But I got to set you up for the fact that beginning in verse 11, it gets less easy. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man, and actually that could be translated over her husband. She must be quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Holy cow. Well, let's go back to what's easy for today. I want the women to dress modestly. Modesty is I guess I would call it a relative term. Some believe that modesty for a woman means don't show any skin. Well, that's certainly modest. I feel at times, I don't know, it doesn't seem practical. I don't know. That's just me. I don't know how women feel about this because, frankly, I've never had nerve enough to ask. So I'm going to have to go with some assumptions, some conclusions that I've drawn through observation. Modesty has to do with covering the parts of one's body that would be considered provocative to men. See, this modesty thing doesn't really have the application. Its context is not one woman to another woman. No, it's what does a man see, and when he sees it, what does he think? What does he feel? Men, by God's design, are stimulated by what they see. When a man sees, I'm going to be PG-13-ish here, but we're adults. When a man sees cleavage of a woman, it's difficult for him to not notice. And when a man notices cleavage, how does a man not imagine the whole of the rest? Only by self-discipline. This is a challenge for men in our culture because depending on, the subculture you're in, where you live, what the style generally is, it basically says, hey, girl, if you got it, flaunt it. And that violates the principle of what Paul is saying. When a woman dresses modestly, she's not ashamed of how God has made her. That's not what this is about. But this is about carrying how God has made her with dignity and self-respect. You see, modesty is about, the message is, I respect myself and I respect you. I don't know where the line falls, how much skin can be shown, how short is too short of a skirt, how low is too low cut of a blouse. All I know, Paul doesn't even say, it just says dress modestly. And then he goes on to say what he means by that, with decency and propriety. What essentially those two words define the kind of modesty. Decency is established, especially in the context of what we're looking at here, by what is deemed by the culture as decent. In our world, our standards of decency are not the same as they were in Paul's day. From nation to nation, decency standards seem to be somewhat different, but they all basically at least say cover the parts that define you as female. I find myself in the deep end of the pool without any water wings because I don't want to offend women, but I do have to think about the realism of the fact that a man is easily tempted by what he sees when it comes to the form of a woman. Do you have to... Women are not responsible for what men think and feel. They're only responsible for what they present. And that's the principle. Present who you are with dignity. And he says with decency and propriety. And then he goes on, which we're going to talk about next time, but he goes on to talk about, I think he's describing what propriety looks like. I'm basically going to have to just leave myself in the deep end of the pool and hope I can dog paddle to the edge because I don't have a real clear, clean cut, here are the standards. No, he gives a principle. Learning to live within that principle is a tough responsibility, but in partnership with Christ, Paul wants women to dress modestly with decency and propriety. I think that's what Christ would want. Well, I muddied the waters more than bringing clarity today, but the good news is that's all the time I've got for it. I'll see you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.